Hello everyone and welcome to my video raid guide to Korag, the 6th boss in the Highmaul raid instance. We actually just killed this guy last night and I figured there's not a whole lot of videos out there for him, so I'll get this one done before I go back and do the optional bosses, which are a little simpler. This guy does have some concepts that are important for everybody to understand as far as movement of the fight and where to stand and where not to stand. So while my raid is standing around waiting and discussing strategies here, let's talk about Nullification Barrier. Now this is a shield that Korag will put on himself. Really, if you have a balanced raid group, you really do not need to worry about how much damage you're doing to it, but expect any magic dealer's DPS to be very, very low on this fight. Now there is actually a way for one single player in the raid group to get Nullification Barrier, and we'll go over that in a moment. It will be used to counter a mechanic in the fight that otherwise does a lot of raid damage and needs to be countered in the way described. But while my camera is nice and steady, let's actually break down the fight as we're looking at it right now and go over the positioning. Okay, so as a tank on the pole, what you want to do is you want to move Korag to the right, and you want to have your raid members stay spread out, but you want to have them move away from the entrance and towards the circle that Korag is actually standing on. The reason everybody is actually spread out is because Korag will do an ability called Expel Magic Fire, which will put a 10-second dot on all raid members, and when it expires will do damage in a 5-yard radius. As soon as Expel Magic Fire detonates, you want all of your ranged and your healers to stack tightly on the edge of the stone circle on the ground. Very soon thereafter, and throughout the rest of the encounter, Korag is actually going to charge a random raid member that is not in melee range, and he's going to leave a suppression field at the area that they were when he targeted them. The raid should move as a whole to the right, and the tanks should drag the boss away counterclockwise. This counterclockwise movement will continue throughout the rest of the fight as abilities force you to move and will allow you to handle adds in a very efficient manner when the transition phase comes up. So apologies there for talking over a still with some graphics, but it does start and happens pretty chaotically, so it was just easier to demonstrate the actual concepts that we're trying to do to varying levels of success here when we actually pull the boss. So as you can see, our raid actually starts out spread out. We have green panties on the head of an elemental shaman. He will serve as the stacking point for the ranged and healing members of the raid. Korag starts off the fight with Expel Magic Fire. It puts that debuff on you for 10 seconds. Watch your range indicator when you get this DBM warning. Move away from others. Try to clip 1 or 2 people at max. Immediately after the fire goes off, he is going to charge a random range member, which we use as our cue to stack up. So the range right now are stacked to the right of that suppression field, and we have moved the boss far enough away to give them warning. And now we come to our tank swap mechanic, which is called Expel Magic Arcane. This will put a debuff on the tank, which makes them get followed around by a big exploding arcane void zone. As a tank, you never want to run this through the raid, and you never want to get caught in it yourself because it will do massive damage to you. You also saw that he summoned a Frost Orb. This ability will do a fair amount of initial damage and then slow anybody trapped within the explosion. Just move the raid out and you'll avoid it completely. Finally, Expel Magic Shadow will put a healing absorb shield on all of the raid and will require your healers to set up healing cooldowns to handle a lot better. Do not underestimate Expel Magic Shadow. Now as I'm running back here, you will notice that Korag actually ran out of his absorb shield, so he will run to the middle to recharge it. He also complicates matters on this attempt by casting Expel Magic Fire, so we have to move away from each other. The reason this is a problem is because we want the entire ranged and healer stack to be stacked up right behind the suppression field, because we need to tank and kill the adds in those suppression fields. The adds actually do a large amount of damage when they're killed unless they're standing in the suppression field, because it is a cast. The way we found that is most effective to do this is to have your tanks stand very, very close and on the edge of those suppression fields and taunt the mobs as they come through. As a tank, the best thing you can do there is actually just stand as close to that suppression field as possible and do whatever you can to get ranged threat on the mobs as they run it. Also, as soon as possible after that transition phase, you want to move Korag ahead of the raid like he was before he ran to the middle. Now as I run around here, notice that orb that's about to hit the ground there. There is a way to counter that, but you should always remember that per each set of orbs, there will be one that hits the ground just because of the way the fight is set up. As I've mentioned multiple times throughout the fight, Korag has an ability on himself that is called Nullification Barrier. This is denoted on my screen as a small white bar below the boss's health. All of the magic damage that your raid is dealing to Korag eats away at this barrier, and when it reaches 0, he will run to the middle of the room and begin another transition phase. For each transition phase, you should have one raid member assigned to jump into the middle and eat as much damage as possible to gain a large debuff slash buff on themselves, which will allow them to absorb these orbs when they're about to hit the ground. So this time when Korag reaches 0 on that nullification barrier, keep an eye on the center of the room, and I will also highlight the person that we have assigned to go into the middle. You also see us do quite a lot better with the ads. So there is our hunter hero. It's slowed down a bit so you can see him jump right across there. Now you always want to assign one person and one person only to be taking this debuff, and hunters are ideally suited to the role mostly because they can still move and DPS, and they're going to need to be moving a lot for the rest of the fight. Now the rest of the raid, we actually did a really good job stacking up here. We see some ads come up at us. We're stacked right next to the suppression fields. No problem killing the ads in the suppression fields that time at all, and raid damage is quite a bit limited. Now something your tanks need to actually be aware of, I got the arcane debuff while I was still in the stack of people. This can be absolutely fatal and instantly wipe the raid if the tank that gets that arcane debuff is not quick enough to move out of it. Beyond that, however, that's about the fight. I'm actually going to keep it going here, but I'm going to fast forward to the next set of ads because we fuck up that transition phase pretty bad. But first I want you to notice our hunter here. He is actually already standing underneath one of those orbs, and he is going to absorb the damage from it right now. And that's really how you counter that mechanic of the fight. The rest of the fight is just movement for the raid, great raid healing by your healers and tanks that are on point. So it really tests everybody in the raid. And right here you're actually going to see a part where all 3 of the orbs that are falling to the ground are actually visible on my screen. You'll notice 2 of them have hunters standing in them and 1 does not. So when I say we fuck up the transition phase, what I mean is that somebody got charged with suppression field right there and they got put too close to the back of the wall. So we actually do not have room to get behind it when this transition phase occurs. Now I actually heroic leap behind there and I try to gather up all the ads as best as I can, but our other tank with Moon right there, he stays on the right side. So what this means is that the 2 tanks are actually split up, and because of that we actually end up having a rough time with tank swapping on the debuff, and he almost dies and goes down and causes a wipe. But we actually handle it and it ends up working out okay for us, and it ends up being a kill. But this is something to always keep an eye on and make sure that your tanks are always together. So there's where that arcane debuff goes out. I'm still stuck here fighting ads. I also have a frost orb next to me. So all kinds of bad right there. I have to run through the field to even get close, and then I finally managed to get the boss back, and luckily our healers are able to keep him alive. Oh, and then one minor thing, don't be tricked by this shit. So that right there is not an actual hole in the outside of the room. There's a fake wall there, and I guess the reason for that is just that Blizzard are trolls, because I tried to be clever with the arcane debuff once. I definitely got stuck there, got wrecked, caused a wipe. Not my brightest moment. I was just kind of upset about it, so just trying to give you another tip there. Fucking trolls, man, seriously. But other than that, it's really not that bad of a fight. It's really engaging throughout. As soon as you learn the mechanics and you know how to counter each one, and then each combination, it does always keep your healers on your toes, and you have to make sure that your raid is always moving and that the tanks are keeping the boss where he needs to be. When he does get relatively low, like I would say sub 10%, sub 15%, you can just gather up the ads from the transition phase and have your ranged burn him as hard as possible, which is what we end up doing here, and it leads to the kill. And yeah, that covers the boss. That's all the abilities on rotation. It's a good fight. Hopefully it leads to some kills for you guys. Looking forward to starting streaming for you all on December 16th. Feel free to subscribe, leave any comments, leave any suggestions. I always listen to them. And thanks for watching. This has been Paul. I'll see you next time.